Some of us are outwardly successful, but inwardly feel unhappy and living a life lacking in purpose and meaning. The Necktie and the Jaguar by Carl Greer can help you discover what's important to you and how to go for it. For more information or to purchase the book, visit carlgreer.com. That's CarlGreer.com. What happens in the sky affects life down here on Earth. The Celestial Compass shows you how and guides your way with astrology you can use from professional astrologer Kathy Biehl. Every episode features her light-hearted, practical forecasts and navigational tips, blended with humor, optimism, and a love of patterns, symbolism, and pop culture references. Kathy translates technicalities into concepts that apply to real life. You'll learn how the current moment ties to where we've been, from the recent past to cycles that last happened years ago, and get a look at where we're heading. And much more, from special topics to special guests. The Celestial Compass, enlightening, entertaining, and empowering. Here's your host, Kathy Biehl.
Greetings, Earthlings. This is Kathy Biehl of empowermentunlimited.net with the latest episode of Celestial Compass. And today we're going to combine two things that are always on my mind and in my life, intuition and food. But first, a brief look at what's coming in the month of November. The full forecast is in my Astro Insight at OMTimes.com and also at my website, empowermentunlimited.net. If you're having Halloween withdrawal, fear not. The vibes are going to support you hanging out in that energy for about 3 more weeks. We have very, very intense energy at our disposal. A Scorpio new moon on the 4th. Mercury, the planet that rules communication, is dancing with Pluto, the ruler of Scorpio, this week, and he then moves into the sign of Scorpio, all of which means it's a time for getting very deep with what is most important to you, very honest, having incredibly candid conversations, being extremely discriminating, selective, following your perceptions and intuition. We all kind of have X-ray vision right now. And in fact, my image for my Astro Insight for this week has a skeleton looking at an X-ray of his own rib cage. So like double duty. Right before Thanksgiving in the U.S., everything starts to lighten up considerably, and we move back into a lot of Sagittarian energy, which is more lighthearted, fun, frivolous, off having a good time, looking for the bigger picture, but also liking to keep options open and enjoying a lot of freedom. The next eclipse family does start during this time, and while that's going on, Venus, who's our social director, moves into the mode of Capricorn, which I call Santa baby mode. She's going to be there well into next year, so we're going to be spending a long, long time looking at our personal bottom line and reviewing everything in our life in terms of whether we think it has staying power. And if you don't know Santa Baby, go look it up. Eartha Kitt sings a wonderful version of it. But now, on to more fun things. Some of you know that I have had a great interest in food for years, and not just because I love to eat and I love to cook, but I spent 30 years as a food writer. I've done many things, often simultaneously, reviewing restaurants and also covering the specialty food industry, which is all the really fancy stuff that shows up in fancy grocery stores. And I have a book out with my observations, the stuff that people really didn't pay me to write, but I had to come up with an explanation of what is going on. It's fairly sassy. It's called Eat, Drink, and Be Wary, Cautionary Tales. It's available in ebook format, hardback, paperback. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, at the publisher site, which is ninthhouse.biz, and that's 9 with a numeral. And this all leads into a wonderful merging of intuition and food with our guests. Singular, Lauren McGurrin, who is a culinary professional who teaches how to use your intuition in the kitchen. And can you tell us a little bit about, well, first off, welcome, Lauren. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Oh, we're both so excited. I'm so glad to be here that I'm also ahead of myself in my brain.
Excellent. Well, can you give a little bit of your background as a culinary professional?
Absolutely. So I cut my teeth in New York City cooking, and I went into the field thinking I'll just hang on here as long as I can. And I'm still doing that to this day. So I was a line cook at many good places. I was part of 2.5 New York Times restaurant reviews. And that includes the openings as well. And then from there, in the past 3 years or so, I moved into private events and a little bit of food styling and culinary producing for television. And then in addition to that, I teach intuitive cooking and all sorts of other fun stuff that we'll get into.
Well, so tell me about the role that intuition has played in your life. Because for someone just to go from, well, I'm going to work in a restaurant to I'm going to teach people how to cook intuitively, there's a link in there somewhere. So were you really drawn to this? Yeah. How did you get there? Where'd you come from?
I would say so. I think that I was always led to food, and I think that was me very much so listening to my intuition. And I think me leaving restaurants was a return to my intuition, and I'll explain a little bit why. Like probably everyone listening, I'm not someone who loves being told what to do. And professional kitchens are very much so militant. Generally, do as I say, don't really ask questions about it, and do it the same way every time, which was a very useful lesson. But it's never somewhere I really felt like I thrived or was particularly me. And I think that came out of an obsession with legitimacy in some capacity, like really wanting to fit the mold and prove that I was really good. And as I've learned, the more you do something, the less I never felt like I was legitimate regardless. So I think returning to what really made me happy and following this path really is what it's about. Like, the happier I am and the more I follow what I want to do, that's what intuition, and the more I can bring to the world.
So did you study the tarot? You've just listened to your intuition? Was there anything more formal about any of this?
So I studied a little bit, but it's less formal. So for those listening, I have also recently created a food and herbalism tarot deck that's on Kickstarter. And that process was an idea that came down fully downloaded. And I would say that I learned a lot about the tarot as a result of creating the deck. I think I went in with a beginner's mindset. And I'll tell you, I'm super glad that I did, because I think if I knew a little bit more, I would have been asking too many questions of how can I people please instead of make something that rings true to me, but that also does accurately in my mind represent the archetypes of the arcana.
Okay, well, that's something I definitely want to talk about. So I'm flipping around my question. So what was the genesis of this tarot? How do you go from I use my intuition to get out of restaurants and to work with people more on my own terms to I think I want to design a deck?
I think it was a little bit of a process of reading. So it started looking at the food content that's out there and trying to figure out a way in which I could bring my own voice into the equation. And I mean, people are doing amazing things. The New York Times Cooking, for instance, there's tons of great recipes out there. But I did not find that any content out there reflected the way in which I cook, which is using my instinct, not really using recipes. And that's not unique to me. That is similar to most of the ways that all the professionals I know cook as well, or even home cooks who have spent a long time studying cooking, or, learning to trust their instincts, learning to listen to their senses in the kitchen. So that was the mid-step between the leaving restaurants and the tarot itself. And then the tarot deck was sort of, as I'm having this conversation with myself about what is instincts, what's that, just, having a moment and letting go of any sort of expectation of what I was supposed to be creating, and this idea coming in fully formed that was, how do I tell stories about the way in which food imbues every aspect of my life? It's very similar to, as you wrote in your book, where these stories are just such a part of who I am. And these archetypes are part of who we are as people, always, but it's how does food play into that, and how can you use that to support you?
So many ways we can go from this. So just pause button on exploring the tarot, and let's back up just a tiny bit. Interestingly, and actually you won't be surprised to know, one of the absolute best home cooks I know doesn't even measure, just uses his hand, doesn't use recipes, uses his hand, is teaching his daughter using that as well, just eyeballing and what it feels like. What would you say you teach intuitive cooking? What's your definition of intuitive cooking?
I think intuitive cooking is, one, trusting your instincts and trusting if you have a creative urge to blend two flavors, understanding that that's a direction in which you should try to explore and be curious and have fun with it. But more practically and more usefully, it's the idea of, all these coaches are out here. It's so trendy these days. And also always to listen to your intuition. And that's great, but what does that mean? And I think the kitchen is one of the best places to hone that, because I was in a class the other day that I was teaching, and I said, you can tell what's going, you don't have to look at a pot to know what's happening, because you can hear the noise behind you. And somebody in the class said, what am I supposed to be listening for? And I had to think about it, but there is an accurate sound. For instance, if you're simmering something behind you, it will sound sort of like a bubbly whisper as opposed to a hiss when something's burning. And so there are unique, distinct cues. That's how I describe it, but you hearing that, you can describe it differently. So learning sort of cues to listen or to smell things or touch things, like you said, with your friend who teaches, just with eyeballing, and yet again, eyeballing, visually checking out what's going on in the pot. There's so many indicators and so much information coming to you at any given time. So I try to help people learn to pay attention to those things.
So to perceive things on many levels with all of their senses sounds like as a part of it. And you have actual classes, formal classes?
Yeah, I do. I have put classes on hold for a minute, but they're going to come back full force, I think, in January. I'll teach a long-form course with 4 to 5 classes that teach, starting from scratch, how do you build taste, how do you pay attention to browning things and searing things, and then how do you incorporate sort of fun kitchen rituals into your routine to build intention and magic and the folklore of herbs in what you're doing in your meals.
So there is structure to the teaching approach, even though ultimately what you're unlocking in people is not somebody else's idea of structure, it sounds like.
Oh, for sure. I think there's definitely still a structured approach. For instance, I'm maybe not teaching it on my platform, but I'm teaching through the Holisticism platform a class on soup, and I do that with a couple of other people too. I've done that cross-promotionally. And at the end of the day, the soup is, you're putting liquids in a pot with some vegetables. That is an obnoxiously simplified version, but, you know, that's really like what you need to get started. So there's so many. I was amazed at the dozen different soups that people made in this class. Some of them were brothy, some of them were pureed, some of them had noodles, some of them didn't. And yet we all got there in an hour and 15 minutes. So very quickly. But at the end of the day, it's all soup.
So each person has an individual creative process, and each person's intuition definitely guides how they go about doing, even though there's a common goal, right? I mean, that sounds like it.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll give, usually a week in advance, they'll have a little worksheet with, and my goal is also very wrapped up in the idea of intuitive cooking to me, but that's a longer subset, is the idea of, you know, not needing to make food waste, because you probably have enough things in your kitchen to make a delicious soup. And if there are ingredients that are already there, you probably already like eating them. So you don't have to go out and buy 8 million things. If you already have a stock in your kitchen somewhere, canned one or whatever, and some vegetables, you can get started. So I usually give a sheet, and it says, you'll need approximately these things, and here's some fun ideas if you're really starting from scratch.
I love that you call this intuitive cooking. I've always called it improvisational cooking. Like, just walk in with a sort of goal and look around and go, what do I have? How can I put them together? Rather than let's go buy 15 ingredients from somebody else's list.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got it. I mean, there is a level of improvisation, but I think that to some extent, obviously this is simplifying it, but I do think the art of cooking has been lost. So I think that you're thinking of it as improvisation because you're already so intuitive.
And with that, we're going to take our first break, and we'll be back in just a couple of minutes. In theory. Thank you.
The cutting edge of conscious radio. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. Being a radio host on IOM FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
Grab a cup of tea or a glass of wine and tune in for Inspired Conversations with publisher Linda Joy on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Linda creates sacred space for leading female luminaries, empowering authors, heart-centered female entrepreneurs, coaches, and healers. A soulful venue where guests openly share the fears and obstacles they've overcome, wisdom and lessons learned, and the personal journey that led them to the transformational work they do in the world. Inspired Conversations to empower you on your path to authentic, soulful living.
Want help with your own celestial compass? Visit my site, empowermentunlimited.net, for Astro Insight forecasts for each week, month, and new and full moon. Want to explore the personal impact? Make a decision? Understand another person? It is possible. Click the Services tab to book a personal session with me. That address again? empowermentunlimited.net.
Coping-19, brought to you by CDC and the Ad Council.
If you're feeling increasingly lonely right now, you're not alone. It's totally normal. Even though we may not be able to get together in person, connecting virtually with friends and family still gives you a chance to interact with people and may help raise your spirits. Join a virtual book club, set up group text chats, or online video coffee breaks with coworkers.
Find more self-care and coping tips at coping-19.org.
Welcome back to Celestial Compass. Today we are talking to Lauren McGurrin, who is the creator of the Herbal and Spiced Tarot deck, Culinary deck, excuse me. It's a tarot. And she also teaches intuitive cooking. Let's go back to your tarot deck. I was looking at some of the major arcana cards during the break, and anybody who's thinking that this might be just a different version of the Rider-Waite imagery is in for a delightful surprise. How did you how did you envision the major arcana? Because it's a really, really interesting play on the archetypes, I think.
I do appreciate that because I think a lot of myself went into it, but I'm going to be honest, it pretty much was a full download. Like I didn't, especially with the major arcana, maybe I would, take the moment and walk away for a month or so when I was writing it, but the ideas came pretty naturally because food and culinary characters are such a big part of my life, and those archetypes are also a big part of our lives. Maybe you don't know that much about tarot, but the idea of the Wheel of Fortune, things being out of your hands, that's something that you've definitely experienced at some point. And then, so for me, that instantly, what came to mind was a food critic. You can do everything possible, but if somebody doesn't like it, they don't like it. And you have to walk away and respect that. And that goes, or for instance, the devil, the idea that the devil for me is always sort of a fun card, because who doesn't like behaving a little badly at times or at their base instinct? And so the idea of it being junk food was an instant thing because junk food's so much fun. So yeah, those ideas really came very naturally to me.
It's funny that you say that because there is a deck that's probably close to 20 years old that two designers out of Philadelphia did called the Housewives Tarot. And the devil is a pinup girl that's devil's food cake looking back at you like, you want a piece of me? So that's funny, the temptation aspect. As I'm looking at these, I really like that the Hermit is table for one, and it's a woman sitting at a table that appears to be in a nice restaurant, enjoying her own company. Some of the others, there's a picky eater. Just looking through here. Also, instead of the emperor, the chef. That's kind of self-evident right there. Are there any other ones that jump out at you as, well, I guess they all do because they're all your babies.
I was saying recently, I mean, for the picky eater, sort of, I do feel like it's the secret low-key mascot of the deck, simply because when I was looking for my illustrator, that was the one where I had probably sketched out about half of them. By sketched out, I had just written a name next to the original thing, and she said, that's the one I want to draw. So it's a little boy who's surrounded by, peanut butter and jelly accoutrements and very skeptical of things. And so that was sort of the first piece that came in place where I said, okay, we can do this together. I think it's going to be really good. But other than that, I think the Nona as the sun is really, really special to me. Like, that card really brings about the warmth of that and sort of the idea of wisdom and sort of a childlike energy regardless. I really like the vegan. I just think that image is really beautiful. The gardener, which is for the high priestess. Yes, the high priestess. And so that's a fun one just because I love the vegetables, and the character's wearing Crocs, and that's so gardener to me. And also Mystery Meatloaf. So those are all fun ones.
Mystery Meatloaf. Okay, which one is...
That's for the moon. Yes.
That's for the moon. I see it. There's a little girl looking at it like, what is this?
Yeah. There's sort of, I think that card in particular sort of encompasses both the comedy, and I don't think I pay a lot of homage to Americana in this deck, but that is one of those moments where it is very distinctly sort of that sort of goofy type of food.
It certainly is. Oh, and the picnic, the lovers, there's a couple enjoying themselves, and there's a spread of food on the ground. Very. So you have your own interpretations. I mean, these images are all so evocative. Somebody who's just playing with the deck and were if they were just to put them out, they'd be able to spin information just because of the not just the visuals here, but the label that's on it. It kind of jumps out, like number 7, the line cook. Oh yeah, you're the grunt. You're the one doing the work. You're the one making it happen. But as you have actually written a guidebook that goes with this that would give your own longer interpretations of what all of these mean and could be used as.
For sure. I think the guidebook, first off, gives great interpretations of everything, but it also gives a way to consider eating at that time and an herb or a spice that might contribute to your well-being, which is just a great way to sort of educate yourself as you're cooking. But I also think that the guidebook is especially helpful for the minor arcana because, for instance, the mushroom suit, which replaces the wands, is very carefully crafted. The mushrooms in particular each have an anecdote that goes with them that really matches the card. And somebody probably maybe wouldn't be able to identify mushrooms by the image itself. So going back to the guidebook and reading those anecdotes is I hope it's an educational tool that's really fun as well.
So let's go through the suits because they are so different from what someone who's used to the Rider-Waite imagery would see. Okay, so you say mushrooms are the substitute for wands, and your short list is divinely inspired action, creativity, energy and movement, ambition and expansion, which goes with what people would be expecting. But then when you look at the suit, each card has a different mushroom variety on it. And then each variety would have its own characteristic. Does the numerology play into it, or you just ordered them the way it felt like you should?
The numerology matches the original ones, but for instance, the lobster mushroom, which is it's a bright red mushroom, and it's for the 5. And I'll tell you a little bit about that mushroom now. It is actually a parasitic mold that overtakes a different kind of mushroom. And so the idea of sort of conflict overtaking you is what I was trying to get across there. So stories like that are what I had in mind when I was researching and putting in interpretations for that part. Or I know that for the 10, in all of the minor arcana, it's sort of the idea of liminality in some cases, or being between, one stage and the next. And so for that card and the mushrooms in particular, I had black trumpet mushrooms because they are historically called mushrooms of the dead because Hades had them playing up from the underworld up to the world of the living. So there are, those aren't interpretations that I knew going in when I started researching this. So there is a less to be gleaned visually, I think, from those images, and the guidebook will be an important point for that.
Is the ace, is that a shiitake log?
It's just a mushroom log in general, so the idea of potential with things sprouting out of it.
That is really fun. And then the 2 looks like just plain old button mushrooms.
Yeah, so I'm certain you know this, but for readers or listeners who don't, so button mushrooms eventually grow into portobello mushrooms. So they're the same mushroom that you're seeing in the supermarket. So, and 2 and 3 are often linked in the arcana. So the 2 is the baby bella, and then the 3 is the portobello mushrooms because one starts the journey and the other one ends that cycle of growth.
So there is so much that people can actually learn about the food that they've been eating forever, in addition to having a new divination tool. Nifty Kino. Okay, and what about, I see the queen of mushrooms. Is that a truffle pig?
It is, yeah. I mean, love me a good animal story. love a little truffle hog. I don't know if you saw Pig. I had so much fun with that movie when it came out. But yeah, I think the idea of this like beloved creature sort of sniffing out this gold and and I think pigs are pretty social, smart animals. So, yeah, the truffle hog. That is a sleeper favorite of mine.
Okay, so can we go on to cups?
Oh, please. Yeah.
So cups, what everyone is used to: love, relationships, intuition, self-awareness, and it's the suit looks like it's all images of different types of cups, or in a couple instances beverage containers. So how'd you have fun with this?
I think food and beverage are obviously a natural pairing, and I think so much of our lives revolve around beverages in the same way that it revolves around food. So, and there are certain drinks that we have at certain times of day or when we're feeling certain ways. So that was a pretty natural. I didn't need to reinterpret it because there was so much to be gleaned there as is. So that's the basis behind it.
And the Five of Cups, as people would imagine, does have a glass of spilt milk in the foreground.
Yes, that was fun. That one was yet again too easy, but just because it was too easy didn't mean it was wrong. It had to be.
And
that.
what's going on in 8? Is that box wine?
Yeah, the idea of sort of, oh, maybe you think this thing is going to be fun, but it's really often cheap and disappointing. Or, maybe you're trying to avoid something and you get this. It's so like nice to talk to, because I spent so much time making this, alone, and then Lisa doing her part alone. But yeah, so that disappointment or that sort of wariness is very evident in that card.
And the 9 of Cups looks like is that a big cup of cocoa with 9 marshmallows in it?
Yes. That idea of sort of cozy comfort, and yeah, maybe it's a little, we all have that luxury thing. Maybe I still like cocoa on occasion. I might feel like I've outgrown it, but sometimes you got to treat yourself. And it was also important to me that I think that things like, the 8 of Cups being a box wine or something like that, there are many things where I think the alcohol interpretation, it was like natural and easy and everyone would get it, but I did want it to sort of relate to sober people too. So there's a pretty even spread.
And let's go on, just so we can look at all of them. Oysters, substitute for pentacles, which are finances, career, home, material, possessions. And interestingly, you say that oysters have signified poverty or luxury at different times throughout their history, but they have played a big role in the ecosystem. So can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. So there is a classic Charles Dickens line that says, poverty and oysters always seems to go together. And I brought that up. That's the analogy for the 4 of oysters in the book. But so first off, oysters are a bivalve. They are a natural fish filtration system for their ecosystems. They are incredibly important to the sea or the ocean or wherever they are growing. So that's part one. They already help things flourish. So I think that it's easy in the case of the pentacles to forget or to have weird associations with money, whereas it's like, no, this actually helps someone get by. But then there's also the poverty aspect, which I just discussed, but it's also in modern times so affiliated with luxury and wealth. Like the 9 of oysters in my deck is a seafood tower. And I remember being a young cook at 22 or 23 and just being like, oh man, when I can order a seafood tower at a restaurant, that's how I'll know I made it. And then there's all these beautiful analogies through literature that make place, like the 5 of oysters being the story of the walrus and the carpenter and him weeping over the oysters he just ate. So
I was going to ask you about the walrus. He's got one of his little fins on his eye. He's so sad.
Yeah. I'm a big Alice fan, so I was so relieved to bring in that aspect of it.
Well, I was born on Lewis Carroll's birthday, so anything that's got Alice in Wonderland references, I'm on board with it. What's going on in the Three of Oysters?
The Three of Oysters is, so for many, many years when ships were going overseas, that's how they would store their food. They would just store bags of oysters off the side of their ship. So the idea of to me, the idea of the men busting open a bag of oysters on on the ship was sort of the epitome of teamwork, having this meal later that you saved in collaboration.
So there's a little bit of history that comes in with these cards as well. That is really cool. Moving on to the substitute for swords, tools. So this is intellect, thoughts, attitudes, beliefs. Tools are sometimes violent, and which is the same as words are. So we'll just start briefly with tools because we're coming up on a break soon. I noticed the Knight of Tools is a mandolin, very much looks just like the one in my kitchen. That's what is going on in the 2, 3, 4, 5. What's in the 6? Looks like it's a jar.
Oh, it's a SCOBY. So it's for making kombucha. So the idea of something fermenting and it goes in the pot and it's not the same when it comes out.
And what's going on in the 2 of Tools? Looks like a pair of cherries on something.
Oh, it's a scale. That's a kitchen scale, and that's like the standard. Yeah, standard sort of cook scale in New York, just because it's inexpensive and you can kind of throw it around a bit. It's not like I love the beautiful XO and I have one at those at my point, but at this point, but yeah, the scale of weighing things and just I love the cherries on there. That was not my direction. That was hers, and I think that really speaks to how we kind of just were on the same vibration because I didn't have to ask her for that, and there it was.
And there it was. Well, we'll just hold this thought, take another break, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes to continue talking about the Herbal and Spiced Culinary Tarot.
Bringing a more conscious lifestyle to your world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
How would you like navigational tools you can use on your own? Visit my site, empowermentunlimited.net, and click the Shop tab. There you'll find lots of talks and guides explaining the big influences at work now, like Saturn in Aquarius and Uranus in Taurus. You'll also find a variety of guided visualizations for relaxing, clearing your energy, or getting to know planetary archetypes. That address again, empowermentunlimited.net.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
If I could be you,
and you could be me for just 1 hour.
If you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Welcome back to Celestial Compass. Today we're talking to culinary professional Lauren McGurrin, who teaches intuitive cooking and has created the Herbal and Spiced Culinary Tarot deck. So we've just been talking about the different suits, and I am wondering, did you come up with specific reading layouts to work especially with this deck?
To be not. My idea was that there is one where it's the idea of the 3-card pull and maybe incorporating it into a dinner party that you're doing. So each course could give you, each card could be the premise for a course. But in general, I think at some point there will be a follow-up cookbook, and I would like to explore that further. But I just started, the idea I have is to get started I really hoped that this deck would be an intro to tarot for culinary people to get excited about it, and a way for tarot people to get more into the kitchen. So the focus is on sort of the education of the cards and less on the reading spreads.
And less on the readings, I see. So people can use this to open their minds, to learn, to find things that they want to explore more. That makes,
yep, absolutely.
And you've got a Kickstarter going for this, and you're almost at the final days of it.
Yeah, we're sneaking into the home base on Thursday, so there's a couple more days to get involved. Yes, at 2 p.m.
At 2 p.m. Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern Time Thursday, and you've made your goal, so the deck is going into creation, correct?
Yeah, we're there. What's going to happen?
And full disclosure, folks, I backed it as soon as I heard about it. Like, whoa, I must own this. So just a few more things to continue the conversation. You say on your website that you see cooking as a spiritual act of self-care. Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. I think that we spend so much time, much like earlier in our discussion together, I think we spend a lot of time shutting out how we're feeling about things. And I think getting into the senses in that way and making something that's just for you or even you and someone you love and feeling it out in that way is really an act of self-care. And then I know you're also enthused by kitchen witchery. I think that it's a way to build intention into your life through the language of herbs, and through just like speaking love into your food.
That's like some people, well, that's what actually praying before you eat started as, blessing the food. And I know people who shoot Reiki out of their hands into their food before they eat it to energize it. So that approach would make sense to me. Backing just a little bit, you do say, I know this isn't something you particularly want to build your life around, but you have admitted that you do something called a fridge reading. If you were to read somebody's fridge, what would you actually do, and what would they get out of it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I do fridge readings on a limited basis when I have the time and in my schedule. It's built in. You can book them on my website. And it's just a way to get to know me better, and I think it really, and for me to get to know you as well. So you'll open your fridge, and you can tell so much about someone by their fridge, what their value systems are, how they decide to have fun, if they are taking care of themselves. And by taking care of themselves, I just mean, in the same way that like taking a shower is taking care of yourself. You can sort of have a similar reading on that on their fridge. And then beyond that, I will also pull cards for you in that time if you want, or you can just ask me culinary questions that have been weighing on you. So it's a way for me to sort of aid and assist whatever has been sort of stressing you out about eating, because a lot of people in my community are people who love food, but also sort of end up seeing food as the enemy, either because of messaging, in the health world these days, is very stressful, or because they suddenly discovered they have an allergy, or just because they never really understood that they already know a ton about how to cook.
That makes a lot of sense to me. While you're saying this, I keep thinking about a a man who invaded my social circle briefly in my 30s, and one friend was insane enough to actually go out with him, and she reported back that his kitchen was filled with cans of SpaghettiOs, which I thought explained everything. Right
oh,
there.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
you've seen some people's refrigerators and you open them and go, "Where's the food?" Like, okay, you've got a 6-pack of beer and maybe some butter. What? And then there are others of us where it's just overstuffed with produce that's going bad because you lost track of what's there. What is this is just darting in our few moments we have left. What is your food philosophy? Not many people speak in those terms, but you do mention that on your site.
I think first and foremost, that having a sense of joy and curiosity towards food is the first step. So I really try to approach it, as I was just saying, I think in the health and the spirituality world these days, there's a lot of messages about what you shouldn't be doing. And I think that I try to approach the questions with what can you be doing that's fun for you? Because I think that fun is the starting point of nourishing yourself. So that's round one. Part two is that I think there is an element of, as you become more curious, you do have a responsibility to determine what your value system is. Now, maybe that is convenience in the moment, and being honest about that is okay. Maybe it's more environmentally geared. And so just becoming slightly more educated within your community about how you can better be a steward of both yourself and maybe the environment. For instance, in my case, there's a lot of food waste that would occur in many of the jobs that I take. So I'm not necessarily a plant-based eater, although I admire that tremendously, but I eat a lot of meat that was otherwise going to get thrown away. So that's a fundamental point. And then also I think that there is an interesting, I just always assumed that the most expensive was the best for a long time. And I have radically changed my opinion on that. And so I think that part of being curious is also not being a snob. So just going in and exploring sort of little hacks. There's so many things that are delicious and not totally harmful that can make your life easier and are really tasty. So I think that that's the three-pronged approach that I mostly advocate.
And I like this don't be a snob part, because if it's something you enjoy, what does it matter what somebody else thinks? So,
100%. And especially I live near Chinatown, so being able to eat down there, and I'll tell you, most of the dim sum meals I have are far more enjoyable to me than things I would get at much more expensive restaurants. So,
and that actually ties to one of the questions that you say on your site that hangs out in your head lately, and that has to do with incorporating ancestral practices in your cooking. What would that look like?
Oh, absolutely. So in many readings I've had, and as I've gotten further and further down the spirituality camp and the witchcraft camp, the more I sort of hear from my relatives, and I hear from my ancestors, and I hear answers. And I think that leaving food for them is really an important way to get in the practice of caretaking and developing a relationship with your ancestors. So that's a big part of what I do. I also do collaborations around it with other great holistic businesses. But I also do believe, and this is worth bringing up, that when I started at least, and now I go in different directions a little bit, but I don't feel obligated to make Irish food, for example, or German food, which is my ancestral lineage, because I think that there is an element of, well, I'm a modern person and this is sort of my palette. Like, this is I hesitate to say artist palette. You're welcome to roll your eyes, but these are the things I like. This is how I express myself. And if these people were alive today, I'd want to share what I'm up to and interested in with them. So I think just even leaving out a little bowl of what you're creating, even if it's, Mexican-inspired food, I think that's a great start. And I also try to make special desserts and things like that that I associate with my grandmother or my grandfather on their birthdays.
Oh, that's really cool. And then do you leave them a little piece of it?
Oh, yeah, I leave it on my altar, and I kind of usually I'll write a little message and burn it to them. Maybe play a song that I know they like. So really getting into it fully.
Do you ritualistically dispose of it once it gets past a certain point of sitting there?
Yeah.
Or does it magically disappear during the night?
Oh, I'll work on that one. If somebody wants to teach me that, please write. That was please. Yeah, I'm dying to know. But no, I haven't figured out. So I did a lot of research. There are some Southeast Asian cultures that will eat it afterwards. In my case, I compost it or I throw it away. I don't, like I said earlier when I was talking about convenience and curiosity, I think doing something is better than doing nothing. And I don't need to make it impossible to, interact with my ancestors, so I meet them sort of where I am. But so if you live in an area where you can dispose of it outdoors politely, that is also traditionally done. These are traditions that are really prominent in every culture, including European cultures, and we don't really talk about ancestral veneration in European cultures enough, but there is a longer history of it. There's a very long history of it.
Well, that I actually didn't know about. You will see in certain Asian restaurants, you'll see little shrines with maybe oranges or tangerines and incense burning, sweet things that have been left for the ancestors to enjoy. But I haven't run into that with Western European. Now I'm very curious.
There's a book that I will refer to you to that is called Honoring Your Ancestors, A Guide to Ancestral Veneration by Mallory Zadwa, Vaudoise, and I'll send you a link on that. But that is an interesting primer for people of European traditions. And I also had a friend in college. I was a religion major, so harkening back to these things. And his final project was on exactly that, those altars in restaurants, because he was working at a restaurant that was a Vietnamese restaurant, and one day he left out a coffee offering, and the boss lost their mind. The guys don't even speak English. So that really led that friend of mine down an interesting path of research.
Wow. Okay. What school had someone doing that? Where did you go to school?
I went to the University of Vermont, and so my final project at the time was on environmentalism and religion. But yeah, religious studies departments. There was 10 of us, and it was an amazing experience.
Sounds like it's informed a lot of what you've done.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. And so quickly, the notion of food justice, I would think, would back into this or grow out of it.
Yeah, 100%.
But you have just a couple.
I think looking into mutual aid programs, finding ways in which food justice, and I think just informing yourself about our food system is really, really, I don't want to, there's already enough things. No one needs to tell you something's important. Everything's urgent these days, but I do think it's a way to feel more connected to your body. I think it's a better way to feel more connected to your community. And I also think it is an amazing way to sort of decolonize our world, because a lot of the people who are leading these movements are people of color, and they have really interesting things to say, and passing the torch to them to dismantle forms of oppression is really important.
And that reminds me, in his last TV series, when Anthony Bourdain went to Houston, where I lived forever, every single person that he talked to was non-Anglo, and they were almost all immigrant. And it was a breadth of communities I had not seen, some of them living there for 20 years. So I want to be sure that people know how they can find you. Please, tell what is your website, and tell us again where the Kickstarter is.
Absolutely. The Kickstarter is called the Herbal and Spiced Culinary Tarot. You can just type in Culinary Tarot and it will come right up. And my website is herbalandspiced.com. You could either book a fridge reading, and it would be great. Like I said, I can troubleshoot some things with you and, give you some affirmations about what you're going through. Or you can just sign up for my free workbook, and you'll get lots of information that way about how to start cooking intuitively in your home.
And you have a newsletter as well?
I do. Yep. The newsletter is, you will be on the list if you sign up for the workbook. I send it out at this point monthly, but I would love to get back to biweekly as soon as possible. And it does incorporate food justice, sometimes blog posts, and ways in which you can get involved with yourself in the kitchen.
Well, I'm really glad that your Kickstarter made, and people, if this intrigues you, you've got through Thursday of this week to back it and get on board to have a deck sent to you next spring when it's done. But you can sign up for the mailing list and get the workbook at any time. So thank you so much, Lauren, for being here. I'm really excited to see what this deck looks like. It will be a cherished and wonderful addition to my extraordinarily, disgustingly large collection. I should be ashamed. At any rate, thank you. I'm so glad that you joined us. And everyone, again, my site is empowermentunlimited.net, and my forecasts are there, and also at OMTimes.com. So have a great November, everyone.